MASH wasn't just a TV show. It was a cultural phenomenon that defined an era. But now, decades later, most of the faces that once filled our screens with laughter and warmth have met endings far more tragic than anyone expected. One actor's bold career move destroyed everything he'd built, while another fought a devastating illness he kept hidden from the public. Their lives off-screen were filled with struggles, heartbreak, and mystery. And it all began the moment MASH ended. McLean Stevenson. When MASH first hit television screens in 1972, McLean Stevenson, who played Lieutenant Colonel Henry Blake, the well-meaning but often frazzled commanding officer of the 4077th Mobile Army Surgical Hospital, stood out immediately. He wasn't the perfect leader. He got confused, he delegated too much, and he sometimes seemed like the chaos around him might actually swallow him whole. But under all that bumbling charm was genuine warmth. Stevenson's easygoing personality and comedic instincts brought Henry Blake to life in a way that felt real. His presence gave the show its early balance between humor and humanity, making him a fan favorite and a grounding force of the show. However, by the end of Season 3, Stevenson was restless. He had spent years in radio and television before MASH gave him stardom, and he began to worry that he was becoming too closely tied to one role. Stevenson wanted more control over his career, to be the leading man and the star of his own show, not just part of an ensemble. So, in 1975, at the height of MASH's success, he made a bold decision that shocked not only fans, but even some of his co-stars. Stevenson decided to leave the show, believing he could replicate his success elsewhere. A gamble that, in hindsight, turned out to be far riskier than he imagined. When the producers prepared to write Henry Blake out, they wanted his exit to have meaning. Instead of the typical happy farewell, where the character simply transfers to another unit, they decided to do something unheard of for a television comedy at the time. The Season 3 finale, Abyssinia Henry, became one of the most emotional moments in television history. After receiving an honorable discharge, Henry Blake says his goodbyes and flies home to his family. But in the final scene, Radar walks into the operating room and quietly delivers the devastating news. Blake's plane has been shot down over the Sea of Japan. There were no survivors. Audiences were stunned, especially because this ending left no room for Stevenson's return. Even the cast reportedly didn't know about the twist until it was filmed. The shock wasn't just about losing a beloved character, it was about how real it suddenly made the show feel. Stevenson left on good terms, but the years that followed were difficult. He landed his own projects, The McLean Stevenson Show, Hello Larry, and In the Beginning, each promoted as his big return to television. Unfortunately, none lasted more than a season or two. Critics were harsh, and audiences didn't connect with them the way they had with MASH. The timing was off, the writing weaker, and Stevenson seemed to carry the ghost of Henry Blake wherever he went. In interviews years later, Stevenson admitted that, looking back, he might have stayed longer if he'd known how iconic the show would become. Sadly, he constantly struggled with the disappointment of seeing his post-MASH dreams fall short. And in February 1996, McLean Stevenson's story came to a sudden end. Just days after undergoing bladder surgery at Encino Tarzana Regional Medical Center in California, he suffered a fatal heart attack at the age of 68. The news hit fans hard, especially because his death came only a day before that of Roger Bowen, the actor who had played Henry Blake in the original MASH film. The strange coincidence made headlines and reignited memories of the character that had defined his career. Larry Linville. If there was one character who could get under everyone's skin on MASH, it was Major Frank Burns. Arrogant, uptight, and constantly trying to prove he was smarter than everyone else, Frank was the kind of officer who followed every rule to the letter except when it suited him. Larry Linville played him perfectly, capturing the pettiness and insecurity that made Frank both hilarious and infuriating to watch. What made the character work so well was how Linville leaned fully into the character flaws. He didn't try to make Frank likable, he just made him human. But behind the scenes, Linville began to feel boxed in. By the end of the 5th season, he believed Frank Burns had nowhere new to go. The jokes were the same, the conflicts predictable, and the character had settled into a routine. Linville was proud of what he'd created, but also frustrated with how repetitive his character had become. So when his 5-year contract ended in 1977, he made the difficult decision not to renew. But rather than kill off Frank, the writers decided to give him a softer exit. In the show's storyline, Burns suffered a nervous breakdown after Margaret's marriage and was transferred to a stateside hospital, promoted in rank but written out of the series. It was a surprisingly gentle farewell for a character who had spent 5 seasons causing chaos. For Linville, leaving MASH was a creative choice, not a personal one. He admired the show and his castmates but wanted to explore roles that didn't trap him in the image of the neurotic military surgeon. Unfortunately, that turned out to be a tall order. Frank Burns had been such a strong presence that audiences and casting directors had a hard time seeing Linville as anyone else. He played guest roles in various TV shows, but he often found himself cast as the same kind of nervous, scheming character. Despite the typecasting, Linville stayed busy. He appeared in theater productions, television movies, and guest spots throughout the 80s and 90s, quietly maintaining a steady career. Unfortunately, in the late 1990s, Linville's health began to decline. He was diagnosed with cancer and underwent surgery in 1998 to remove part of a lung. For a while, he seemed to be recovering, but complications returned. During treatment at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York City, he developed pneumonia. On April 10, 2000, he passed away from pneumonia-related complications at the age of 60. When news of his death spread, fans and former castmates remembered him not just as Frank Burns, but as a gifted actor who had made people love to hate him. Few television villains ever walked that line so well. Larry Linville's Frank was ridiculous, irritating, and unforgettable. He left MASH at the right time, but his shadow lingered over the series long after he was gone. And while Frank Burns may have been the show's most disliked character, the next actor to leave MASH faced an entirely different kind of struggle, driven by independence. Wayne Rogers. Wayne Rogers brought a cool, easy rhythm to the chaos of MASH as Captain Trapper John McIntyre. He and Allan Arbus' Hawkeye Pierce quickly became the show's heart, a pair of quick-witted surgeons who used humor to survive the insanity around them. But while fans saw 2 equals sharing the screen, behind the scenes, the balance was starting to shift. By the show's 3rd season, Rogers began to feel uneasy about how his role was evolving. At first, Trapper and Hawkeye were written as partners, a duo with matching lines, shared pranks, and equal weight in the story. Over time, though, the scripts leaned more heavily toward Hawkeye, giving him the moral center of the show and more emotional arcs. Rogers, who had signed on to play a co-lead, began to notice that Trapper's lines were being trimmed or reassigned. He wanted both characters to grow equally, while the writers were clearly building MASH around Allan Arbus' perspective. Rogers raised his concerns privately, but nothing really changed. Surprisingly, he wasn't under a binding contract, something unusual for a major network series, and that gave him a kind of leverage. So, when Season 3 ended, Rogers decided to walk away from the show. This decision stunned viewers, especially because Trapper John disappeared from the show without warning. When the 4th season opened, it was explained in a single line. He had been discharged and sent home before Hawkeye returned from leave. The abrupt exit left fans wondering what had really happened, and over the years, it became one of television's most talked-about departures. Leaving a hit show at its peak could have ended Rogers' career, but he handled it differently from many others. Rather than chasing another sitcom role, he turned his focus toward business, something he'd always been interested in. He had a sharp mind for finance and real estate, And by the 1980s, he was quietly becoming one of Hollywood's most successful investors. He didn't disappear from television entirely. He appeared in various shows and TV movies, but his main identity shifted. In later years, audiences saw him not as Trapper John, but as a confident financial expert. It was a surprising transformation that earned him respect far beyond the entertainment industry. Rogers often spoke warmly about MASH in interviews, though he remained honest about why he left. He didn't regret the show or the friendships, but he was clear that staying would have meant compromising on his creative instincts. He admired Allan Arbus and the show's success, but knew it had evolved into something different from what he had signed up for. By leaving early, he avoided the frustrations that later plagued some of his co-stars and in many ways preserved his fondness for the experience. In his personal life, Rogers was described as witty, kind, and grounded, someone who didn't take fame too seriously. He maintained friendships with several cast members long after leaving the series and was often praised for his intelligence and dry humor. Sadly, on December 31, 2015, Wayne Rogers passed away in Los Angeles at the age of 82 from complications of pneumonia. His death closed another chapter in the MASH legacy, defined by reinvention. He had managed what a few actors do, to step away from a phenomenon and still create a new identity entirely on his own terms. While Rogers' departure left a noticeable gap in the early years of MASH, the show continued to evolve, and with that evolution came new faces and deeper emotional tones. One of the actors who helped shape that next era was Harry Morgan, whose arrival would redefine the dynamic of the show in ways no one expected. Harry Morgan. When Harry Morgan stepped into MASH as Colonel Sherman T. Potter, the show was at a turning point. The lighthearted chaos of its early seasons had given way to deeper emotion, and Morgan's arrival helped bridge that shift perfectly. He brought a calm authority that steadied the show after the loss of Henry Blake, yet still managed to keep the humor and warmth that fans loved. Colonel Potter wasn't just another commanding officer. He was the embodiment of experience. A career army man who'd seen more than enough of war, he led with quiet wisdom and empathy instead of bluster. His dry humor and fatherly tone became the emotional glue of the later seasons. Morgan's performance made Potter feel like someone who genuinely cared for the people under his command, and that grounded the series through some of its most dramatic storylines. What made his casting even more interesting was that Harry Morgan had already appeared on the show once before. In Season 3, he guest-starred as General Bartford Hamilton Steele, a completely different character whose erratic behavior offered a few early glimpses of Morgan's comedic brilliance. The producers were so impressed with that performance that when McLean Stevenson left, they brought Morgan back in a permanent role. This time, as Potter, he became part of the show's lasting identity. Fans instantly accepted him. Instead of trying to replace Henry Blake's chaotic charm, Morgan gave Potter his own rhythm. He was firm when he needed to be, but never cruel, blending old-school discipline with genuine heart. His quick wit, his love for horses, and his old-time expressions gave him layers that made him feel real. It was clear from the first few episodes that the cast had found a new center, someone who could balance the jokes with moments of deep sincerity. Off-screen, Harry Morgan was every bit as respected as his character. By the time he joined MASH, he was already a veteran actor with decades of experience in film and television. He'd worked with legends like James Stewart and Jack Webb, starred in the classic series Dragnet, and built a reputation as one of Hollywood's most dependable character actors. What stood out most about him, though, was how effortlessly he fit into any cast. Whether he was playing a stern general, a bumbling sidekick, or a small-town sheriff, Morgan always found the human side of the role. During his 8 years on MASH, he became a guiding presence not only in front of the camera, but also behind it. The cast often spoke about his professionalism and his humor, how he brought calm to long days on set. and how he treated everyone with the same warmth as Colonel Potter would. That genuine kindness made him beloved among his peers and helped shape the tone of the later seasons, which leaned more into heartfelt storytelling. When MASH ended in 1983, with the record-breaking finale, Goodbye, Farewell, and Amen, Morgan stayed with the role a little longer. He reprised Colonel Potter in the spin-off series After MASH, which followed Potter, Klinger, and Father Mulcahy as they adjusted to civilian life working in a veterans hospital. The show only lasted 2 seasons, but it gave fans one more glimpse of the wisdom and humor that made Potter such a beloved figure. Unlike many of his co-stars, Morgan didn't chase fame after MASH. He continued acting steadily, appearing in guest roles and TV movies, but he also enjoyed a quieter life away from the spotlight. He had no major public health battles and remained active well into his 90s. In 2011, Harry Morgan passed away peacefully in his sleep at his Los Angeles home after being treated for pneumonia. He was 96 years old. His passing marked the end of a remarkable career that spanned more than half a century and hundreds of roles. Even now, fans remember him as the kind of actor who could make authority feel human and humor feel wise. But just like Harry Morgan, another actor who would remain with the show till its final seasons would meet his end in a more heartbreaking way. William Christopher. William Christopher didn't need to be loud or flashy to leave an impression on MASH. As Father Francis Mulcahy, he was the quiet heartbeat of the show, the chaplain who saw everyone's pain and tried to make sense of it in a place where sense was often impossible. His calm presence, gentle humor, and unshakable compassion gave the show its moral grounding. And even when he wasn't at the center of the action, you could always feel the difference when he was on screen. Father Mulcahy was a man of faith, surrounded by chaos. While others used jokes or sarcasm to survive, he used kindness. He offered comfort to the wounded, patience to the difficult, and forgiveness to anyone who needed it. What made the character special wasn't that he preached, it was that he listened. And that came straight from William Christopher himself, who brought a real sincerity to the role. When the show began, the character of Mulcahy wasn't yet fully formed. The pilot featured a different actor, George Morgan, in the role, but producers wanted someone who could give the chaplain more warmth and subtle humor. Christopher fit that vision perfectly. By the second season, he had become an irreplaceable part of the ensemble. He wasn't just a background priest offering quick prayers between surgeries. He became the voice of conscience for the entire camp. Over the years, his storylines grew deeper, showing his frustration, courage, and quiet strength. Despite the show's demanding schedule, Christopher's focus wasn't only on his work. His family life, particularly his role as a father, shaped who he was outside Hollywood. When his son Ned was diagnosed with autism, Christopher and his wife Barbara became early advocates for autism awareness at a time when it wasn't widely understood or discussed. They co-authored a heartfelt book titled Mixed Blessings about their experiences raising a child with autism, a book that resonated deeply with parents who felt isolated by similar challenges. Christopher used his platform to speak about patience, empathy, and the need for acceptance, echoing the same compassion that Father Mulcahy represented on screen. He remained with MASH until its finale in 1983, appearing in more than 200 episodes, and then continued the role in the spin-off After MASH, where Father Mulcahy worked at a veterans hospital alongside familiar faces from the show. Although the spin-off ran only 2 seasons, Christopher's portrayal remained as heartfelt as ever. He treated the role with respect, never turning it into a caricature, and fans appreciated that. After the curtain closed on MASH, Christopher continued acting in stage productions and guest roles, but began stepping back from the spotlight. Sadly, in 2015, His family learned that he had developed small cell carcinoma, an aggressive form of cancer. For the next 18 months, he faced it with strength, supported by his wife and sons. But as the cancer advanced, Christopher's condition worsened in his final weeks. Surrounded by his family in their Pasadena home, he passed away peacefully on December 31, 2016, at the age of 84. News of his death spread quickly among fans and former castmates, many of whom shared memories of his warmth and kindness. And in that same spirit of quiet strength and humanity, another cast member carried those qualities into a very different kind of role that brought wisdom, mystery, and a touch of melancholy to the operating room. Allan Arbus. If there was one character on MASH who could cut through the chaos without raising his voice, it was Dr. Sidney Friedman. Whenever the doctors and nurses were stretched to their emotional limits, he was the man they called, the calm, thoughtful psychiatrist who could bring order to a mind unraveling under war's pressure. Played by Allan Arbus, Dr. Friedman became the sole doctor of the series. Allan Arbus brought a quiet authority to the role. With his calm tone, patient eyes, and slightly sardonic humor, he managed to make therapy scenes feel personal and real, even in a sitcom. He was never judgmental, never dramatic. He simply listened, and in doing so, he reflected back the humanity that the war tried to erase. His catchphrase, "Ladies and gentlemen, take my advice. Pull down your pants and slide on the ice," was his way of telling everyone to stop overthinking and breathe, even in the madness of the war. Dr. Sidney Friedman first appeared in the show's second season and would return periodically over the next decade, appearing in 12 episodes from 1973 to 1983. Despite not being a main cast member, his impact was immense. His episodes often explored some of MASH's deepest emotional territory, from trauma to guilt and the heavy psychological toll of war. Allan Arbus wasn't a psychiatrist in real life, but his background gave him an unusually deep understanding of people. Before he ever stepped in front of a camera, he lived an entirely different life behind the lens. He was a highly skilled photographer who worked for the U.S. Army Signal Corps during World War II, taking medical and personnel photographs. After the war, he and his then-wife, the legendary photographer Diane Arbus, became well known in the New York art world. Together, they opened a photography studio, producing fashion images for magazines like Glamour and Vogue. Their marriage was both creative and complicated. Diane Arbus became famous and later infamous for her haunting portraits of outsiders and misfits, while Allan maintained the steadier side of their partnership. They divorced in 1969, but they remained on good terms, with Allan supporting Diane's artistic journey until her death in 1971. After their separation, Allan made an unexpected leap. He left photography and pursued acting. It wasn't the kind of reinvention most people would dare attempt in their 40s, but Arbus found his calling. His early acting work included small film roles and guest spots on television. But it was MASH that made him unforgettable. Off-screen, Arbus lived a private, intellectual life. He never sought the kind of fame that many actors chase. Friends described him as thoughtful and warm, someone who enjoyed conversation about art, life, and philosophy. He continued acting after MASH, appearing in shows like Law and Order and Curb Your Enthusiasm, but he preferred the substance of smaller, meaningful roles over celebrity status. In his later years, Arbus's health began to decline as he developed congestive heart failure, a condition that slowly weakened his heart. Sadly, he passed away peacefully at his Los Angeles home on April 19, 2013, at the age of 95. When news of his death broke, fans and former colleagues spoke about how much depth he had brought to a show already filled with brilliant performances. Kellye Nakahara. Every great show has that one character who doesn't always take center stage, but somehow manages to make the entire story feel more human. On MASH, that person was Kellye Nakahara. As Nurse Kelly Yamato, she didn't need big speeches or dramatic moments to leave an impression. With her easy smile, warmth, and quiet confidence, she became the emotional pulse of the show, the kind of presence that made viewers feel that, no matter how chaotic things got, compassion would always find its way back into camp. Kellye's character started out humbly, just one of many nurses in the background tending to patients, laughing in the mess tent, or lending a helping hand during surgery. But it didn't take long before audiences began to notice her. She had a natural glow on screen, and over time, the writers gave her more space to shine. One of her most memorable moments came in the episode where she confronted Hawkeye Pierce, calling him out for overlooking the nurses as individuals. That single exchange gave Nurse Kellye depth and dignity in a show already rich with humanity. Behind the character, Kellye Nakahara was just as genuine and kind-hearted as the woman she portrayed. Born in Oahu, Hawaii in 1948, she grew up surrounded by art and music. Before acting, she studied painting and later moved to San Francisco, where she worked as a watercolor artist. Acting wasn't originally part of her plan, but like many of the best stories, life had other ideas. When she auditioned for MASH, she had little professional experience, yet her authenticity won over the casting team immediately. There was nothing forced or artificial about her performance. She was relatable, grounded, and effortlessly sincere, the kind of person who didn't have to act warm because she simply was. And that sincerity translated beautifully on screen. Over the years, Kellye appeared in more than 165 episodes, staying with MASH from its early days in 1973 until the show's legendary finale in 1983. She was one of the few Asian American actors with a recurring role on a major primetime series at the time, and she handled that quiet responsibility with grace. Without making her character a stereotype, she became a symbol of representation in an era when television offered very little of it. Off-screen, Kellye's life was as colorful and fulfilling as her paintings. She married her longtime love, David Wallet, and together they raised 2 children. Even after MASH ended, she never really left the creative world. Instead, she returned to her first passion, painting. Her watercolor work became highly regarded, especially her scenic depictions of everyday life and Hawaiian landscapes. She even sold her art in galleries and local exhibitions, often donating pieces to hospitals and schools. Friends and fans who met her in person described her as luminous, someone who treated everyone with kindness and genuine curiosity. Sadly, in her later years, Kellye was diagnosed with peritoneal cancer, a rare and aggressive form of abdominal cancer. True to her spirit, she faced it quietly, never wanting her illness to define her. She preferred privacy, focusing on family, her work, and gratitude for the life she'd built. On February 16, 2020, Kellye Nakahara passed away at her home in Pasadena, California, surrounded by her loved ones. She was 72 years old. News of her passing rippled through the entertainment world, with heartfelt tributes from her co-stars and fans who remembered her as the warm, grounding soul of MASH. Even today, when viewers revisit MASH, it's impossible not to notice Kellye's gentle presence in the background. Always smiling, always steady, always kind. She may not have been one of the show's loudest voices, but she was one of its most beloved. Her passing marked the end of an era, but her warmth remains woven into every frame of MASH. And the story continues, moving from the gentle heart of a nurse to another life behind the scenes, one filled with art, insight, and resilience. Who was your favorite actor on MASH? Drop your answers in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the next video on your screen, like this video, and subscribe to our channel for more updates.